Alright, so we have a 4x8 sheet of plywood here, which I've been using as my throwing circle for the last 3 years. You can see, I think, that there are cut lines 2 feet apart. I had those cut when I picked up the plywood from the hardware store. They will usually cut that for you. We lay this down, and as we go into the video, I'll talk about the hardware needed to do this. We will lay this down on flat sand, or make sure the surface is flat. The reason I'm saying that is that the strength comes from the fact that you're putting it on a flat surface and not from the actual plywood or hardware itself. The hardware holds the thing together, and I've never had it move. We've had world-class masters throwers on this. I think at least 3 world champions. I'm trying to keep a count of that, but serves a purpose. Talk about the throwing surface itself. I originally threw just off raw plywood. As the plywood got very polished, and particularly in the hammer, I didn't have to do anything to turn my feet, so it kind of ruined my performance for about a year. What we're using here is decking paint, which you can buy with granularity. It's already got non-slip. I think it's called decking paint. But in order to get it even more like concrete, you can add sand. Where do you get the sand? In Florida, you just go out in the backyard and dig yourself a handful and mix it up with the paint. This was a bit of trial and error. I've probably got several coats on this now, but the more coats that you have, there's a potential that they will indeed flake off. But this is the only maintenance that you have, maybe every 4 to 6 months, to put a new coat of paint on. And adding granularity is like baking. There's not really a way to tell you. You're just going to have to figure it out. Start light. Okay, let's take a look at the inside of this throwing boards. This is obviously 1/2, and you can see in the middle there are 3 hinges, equally spaced. The screws, make sure you get fairly stubby, relatively large diameter screws to go into the plywood. Wood screws, of course, not metal. In the corners you can see how these straps attach. Make sure that all of these components are metal, and you can see on the strap here that we're using a metal buckle, a metal D-ring welded here, and a clip which makes it really easy to put on and off. Underneath the pins, which you think you can see here, there are 3 pins located evenly in the center of the board. We learned from experience that putting these thin metal plates underneath the pins really gave added strength to the whole structure. The other thing, if you note, I know it's kind of nasty yellow and white paint here, but because you're putting this down on the ground, make sure this side is painted, don't just leave it wood. This is what holds the 2 halves of the throwing surface together. You need one on each side. It's a 6" by approximately 1" mild steel strap with 2 bolts at each end, and you can see I've been experimenting with a different kind of bolt on the left hand side. Very flat surface with rounded edges, wing nuts on each of the bottom. This was what we use most of the time, were a carriage bolt. It doesn't protrude very much from the surface at all. Just a few loose ends to finish up with. The plywood thickness that I used was 5/8 of an inch. The pins are dowel pins. There's screws on one end and they go into one side of the plywood. You cut bolt heads off the other side to create a pin, and then drill holes very carefully on the other side. The weight of each half is about 35 to 37 pounds. It's pretty easy to put it over your shoulder, move it around. I keep mine inside a Chevrolet Suburban SUV. If you're going to keep them in the garage, they can easily be loaded into the trunk of the car, and probably use a bungee to, at least tie the lid of the trunk down while you're driving to wherever you're going to throw.